Welcome, everyone. I'm Professor Owen Anderson. I'm a professor of philosophy, and so it won't surprise you to find out that I believe philosophy is the discipline that best teaches us how to organize our minds. We could call this approaching philosophy as organization. And I got that idea from my friend Peter Redpath, and he passed away last year, but he had written a number of helpful essays about this idea of organization. And so I'm using some of his ideas, but I'm applying them in a setting a little differently than he did. He especially applied them to Aristotle, and here I'm applying them to learning to think about any thoughts, whether Aristotelian or any others. So just to begin, we can see that philosophy is basic to every other discipline in the university because it is in philosophy that we ask the questions that the other disciplines assume. For example, if you're studying physics, you don't ask if matter exists, if energy exists, you just study those things. But in philosophy, we ask, well, what is matter? Does it exist? What is energy? And the same is true for psychology, which simply studies the brain and behavior. But in philosophy, we ask, well, what is the mind and is it different than the brain? So philosophy gets us into the questions about the very structure of reality, which are necessary in order to understand and organize our thoughts and our lives as we approach other subjects. So we organize our minds around the basics of knowledge, reality, and value. Knowledge meaning how do we know things? What's our authority? Reality, what is real? And value, which asks what is good and how do I make choices? And so any person, when you study any person, you'll see this is a true statement. They organize their minds and therefore their lives around these things. It just might be that they've organized them around things that are false or incorrect, and that leads to difficulties and confusions. So we want to do philosophy in order to organize our minds around the truth. And the truth here means what is real, what actually is the case, so that when we're making choices, we don't make choices based on a fantasy or a fiction. For example, if you want to leave a room and you have a false belief about the door, what you believe is the door is really just a wall. Well, when you go to exit the room, you'll bump into the wall and fall down because your beliefs aren't lined up with reality. So we want to understand, where is the door when I need to exit? So here's a few ideas about that. We'll begin with reason. The word reason is similar to other words that we use, like reasoning, rationalization, reasons, but here that's not what we mean. Reason is how we organize. It's the tool that we use to organize our thoughts. Sometimes it's called the laws of thought. Just like the laws of physics explain the organization of physics of material objects, reason is the laws that govern how thinking occurs. What is it? And so when we think, what we're doing is we're distinguishing one thing from another thing. We distinguish a circle, which has no corners, from a square, which has four 90-degree corners. And we can symbolize this by saying that we distinguish A from non-A, because A could be anything you want, not just a circle. And we say A is not non-A. And that means that we're able to organize our minds. A door is not a wall. And when I want to leave the room, I can't use a wall, I have to use a door. So what happens is that when a sentence combines things that are contradictions, then the sentence has no meaning. For instance, if the sentence says, the square is a circle, and a square means has four corners, and a circle means has no corners, well, that's a contradiction. And it's not so much that that's a false statement, although I might understand if you put false down. It's a meaningless statement. Doesn't mean anything. It doesn't pick out anything in the world. And the same is true when a sentence does not combine things that should be combined. For example, a sentence that says the square has no corners. And a square means has four corners. So you're saying the thing that has four corners has no corners. Again, this is a meaningless sentence. Now, we also organize our thoughts, not just distinguishing things, but we organize them. Might almost call that horizontal. We organize them vertically, with presuppositionally from basics, building on the basics to what is not basic. Think of a building with a foundation, a ground floor, and then the other stories are built on top. The 10th story is not foundational, not basic. It has 9 stories plus a foundation on which it rests. So what is not basic, the 10th story, presupposes the other stories. If you're going to understand how the 10th story stays up there in the sky, you'll have to get and understand the previous stories. So we do presuppositional organization because it's a key to settling disputes. It's a key to organizing your own minds. This is in addition to that, because that's kind of the focus of the whole video, organizing our own minds. But if you don't do presuppositional thinking, you'll never really settle disputes because you'll continue arguing about 10th story things when both of you are presupposing a number of other things which are what led you to your conclusions on the 10th story, and you'll never really solve the problem. So, for example, when an atheist, someone who says there is no God, and a theist, someone who says there is God, when they're in a dispute, they're arguing about what is eternal, what has existed without a beginning. One says the material world, the universe, is eternal, and the other says, no, it had a beginning. It was created by God because only God is eternal. So if they stay up here arguing about who has better followers, who produces a better life, if the Bible's accurate or not, those are all important questions. But unless you settle what's eternal, you won't settle these other ones logically. You might settle them because one person gives up and gets tired of talking. But presuppositional thinking, not just horizontal where we distinguish things, but vertical where we get to our basic beliefs, is necessary to organize our thoughts and know what we think. Because even ourselves, a lot of times we live in the 10th story. We get on social media to argue about politics and fashion and pop culture, but we don't really think ourselves, what do I believe is eternal? And why do I think that? Do I know it, or do I just believe it because someone told me? And so we need to do all of this organizational thinking first and foremost to know ourselves, and then be able to organize our lives, our thoughts, and interact with other people and understand them and what they think. And so you can see the use of reason to understand and organize what is and what is not is basic to what we're doing here. You can see we use reason for organizing our minds. Without reason, our mind becomes unorganized and life becomes confusing, should be, and without any clarity. This, in fact, ends up leading us to nihilism, where we say ultimately nothing makes any sense. It's all random. So let's give some examples here of how we do this. Organization. First, reason and sources of information. Reason is not itself a source of information per se. You can develop some arguments from reason, for example, just from reason. For example, that there must be something eternal. Just using reason to reflect on the concept of eternal and the concept of nothing can give you an argument that yes, something must be eternal. But that's using reason on information, the concept eternal. And so the question comes up in life. Little kids ask this all the time. We start asking this right away. How do you know? Remember that from little kid days? How do you know? They might ask their parents, their teachers, each other at the recess. But we still wonder that. How do you know? What is your authority? And so you have to organize your mind. Well, there's only so many different kinds of authorities and sources of information. Our senses, our tradition, our intuitions, which is kind of those inner feelings people get. They have an immediate awareness of it, a gut feeling. Common sense, what a group shares in common and says, no, this is just common sense. Empirical science, which is not just my senses, but the systematic study of empirical data from the senses. Rationalism, which is not the same as reason. Rationalism is where you try to build a logical structure of beliefs on your starting points. And that's the issue that comes up. It's not presuppositional. It doesn't critique those starting points. It just builds on them. And so none of those is basic, meaning all of those presuppose reason. All of those sources of information presuppose you're distinguishing A from non-A. and you're trying to make coherent sentences that don't have contradictions, and then you're using arguments to prove those to be true. And so all of those require we use reason to organize our beliefs and then interpret them for meaning, because a lot of times people will say, they'll confuse those. They'll say, my senses tell me the following. And they've confused sense data and their interpretation of the sense data. The couch is causing people harm. Well, what they saw was a person tripped on the couch, but the couch didn't actively do anything there. And so you have to rephrase this, to reinterpret it differently. This comes up especially in car accidents, as people argue about who did what. They might agree on the events, but they don't agree on the interpretation of the events. So we use reason for that, and that's why reason is most basic. It forms the very beliefs that we're making based on our sense data or our intuition, and then it tests them to see if they have meaning. So let me give some examples now about organizing our thoughts. We don't use these words, so you'll have to make sure you're kind of paying attention here and understanding. We don't use being in this way very often. The first point here is being and non-being. Being is what exists. We could use a non-technical word, the stuff. Non-being is nothing, non-existence, fiction. It isn't empty space, because empty space is something. It's nothing at all. So you have being and non-being. Those are our two most basic concepts. Everything we talk about either is being or is not non-being. The square is such that it has four corners. The square is not a circle. But from there, we get into, and actually let me add this one. I'm surprised I didn't have this on here. Eternal, which just means non-eternal. Eternal is what is without beginning. So once we start thinking about being, we also immediately have to organize our thoughts around what is eternal, what has existed from eternity. Some things are eternal, which means they had no beginning. Some things are temporal, which means they had a beginning. They did have one. Now, both the eternal and the temporal could have no end. When something is temporal, meaning it had a beginning, but it has no end, that's called everlasting, like the everlasting gobstopper. It just goes on forever. It had a start, but it goes on forever. Our souls are immortal, meaning they had a creation, they had a beginning, but they never end. And so I know we use the word eternal and everlasting. We confuse those and we say, my soul's eternal. We mean it has no end. But here, eternal means specifically what is without beginning. And so, for example, in Christianity, God alone is without beginning. He created the material world. He created our souls. And so once you get into being, you immediately ask the question, what is eternal and what isn't eternal? Little kids ask this all the time by saying, where did that come from? Where did that come from? And they don't really realize it yet, but they're looking for what is eternal. And that's when we get next to substance. Okay, well, what substance are you talking about? And you might say, I thought substance was the same as being. Well, the substance is the underlying being in which properties adhere. It's a little different than number two, the general intuition of being, existence. Substance is being as. And there's two kinds. Only. I'll explain why briefly. And mostly this video is not for defending things. This video is more an information video. But I'll explain why here. There are two kinds. There is material substance, which has extension. That means size. If I had a tape measure, I could extend it out and measure things that are material. But material being is not conscious. It's extended, non-conscious. The table is not conscious. The books are not conscious, but they do have extension. The other one is spirit. And here I'm using spirit, but also soul, mind, self. I use those all to mean the same thing. And spirit or mind is non-extended. You can't measure it with a measuring device. It doesn't have size where you could put a bunch of spirits in a jar and save them for later. But it is conscious. That's what it does. And so, well, what about the other two options? Well, and a substance that is neither extended nor conscious is nothing. You're saying it's not extended, it's not conscious. So far it's nothing. And on the other hand, a substance that is both extended and conscious leads to a contradiction. Now, here I'm not going to show that. We go over that when we talk about the existence of the soul, that the soul is not the same as the brain, to show that material substance and soul are not reducible one to the other. And it could go either way, because the idealists try to reduce matter to spirit. They say there's only mind. And the materialists, that you're probably more familiar with, say that no, the brain is all that exists. The mind is just the brain. And so we'll see that's a contradiction, which means we only have these two substances. Next level organization is properties. This might be where we spend all of our time in our thinking. A property is about a substance. So you got to know substances first, logically. And there are material properties. Here's a number of them: color, shape, size, relationships. And those are often spatial, like in, by, on, near, top, bottom, right, left, fast, slow, up, down, diagonal. And there's more, right? Those are all spatial, which means they're about extended properties. And then there are spiritual or mental properties or activities like thinking and meaning, understanding, ignorance, clarity, nonsense. I'm going to add up here just so it's clear I'm using both of these. Property or activity, right? So a property in, on, of, but an activity is doing something, the verb. And we get sentences out of putting them all together: the subject, the verb, the direct object. And so to do any of these, if someone was to say, that thing is running quickly, well, you could immediately organize in your mind. It's a material object, a body of some kind. Unless it, and let me say, well, wait, it's using the word running poetically, allegorically. Well, I'm using them literally in this case, just literally. That thing understands. Okay, well, now we're talking about a mind of some kind. And then you could begin to critique it, because they'll say, no, I'm talking about the rock over there. It understands things. Well, now we have a contradiction involved here, because a merely material object doesn't understand things. So a belief is built of concepts. For example, the square has corners. The square is a concept. Corners is a concept. We put them together. And you prove a belief to be true by making an argument, premises that support a conclusion. And so you'd make a case about how we know a square has corners. And so you have these three pieces of thinking. You can ask, which one am I using? A concept, a belief, which is built up of concepts, and an argument, which is built up of beliefs, but it's especially being used to prove another belief, the conclusion, to be true. And so can you do this same organizational approach with a subject such as the meaning of your life and how you make choices? You'd start with the most basic thing. What is the purpose, highest goal in life? Is it your personal pleasure, money, or family, or fame, or some other? That's not an exhaustive list. What's the thing you want the most? And once you've identified that, then you can begin to organize your choices around that goal. So that tries to make sense of your life. Do my choices make sense in light of that goal? Or do I say I have that goal, but my choices are going here, there, everywhere else? A couple of them might hit the goal. Some of them are taking me away from the goal. We can begin to evaluate the efficiency of your life, the consistency of your life. Does your life show any integrity? And then going forward, begin to organize your life choices around that goal. And that's true from everything, from simple choices. Like I brush my teeth because I want healthy teeth. I don't want to be in the dentist all the time with my teeth falling out and paying money for fake teeth and things breaking. That gets in the way of me getting to my goals. So I just brush my teeth. Simple. To big choices. I'd like to get married one day, but I want to marry a wise person. So I need to learn what is wisdom and how to find a wise person to marry. Big choice. But I need to add this in. That, again, we can almost say is a horizontal level. We also have to organize presuppositionally. So back up here, I said the most basic thing is knowing what is your purpose, which then explains your choices horizontally. But flip it vertically, the most basic thing is, well, you need to know what a human is. When someone says, do you lead a meaningful human life? A meaningful blank life? What's the blank? What is a human? And to know what a human is using reason to distinguish it from what humans aren't. And it means you'd have to know, where do humans come from? What created humans? And that gets you into different worldviews, doesn't it? Are we merely animals that kind of got burped out by time and chance? Or are we just a soul that's crammed into a body, and we pre-exist the body, we get crammed into a body, we get out later and we try to stay out of the body? Or are we a body-soul unity created by God, as Genesis teaches? You'd have to really answer those to answer number one. And so to organize your life, you'd have to answer these questions. And that whole time, you'd be using reason, as we defined it above, to be distinguishing between God and not God, man and not man, good and not good, in order to organize your thinking and your life choices. So now, given this information on this video, can you begin to organize what you think? That's the first step. What do you even think? And then second, where do you get information from? How are you proving what you think to be true? And then, third, can you test it to see, are you correct? Is it true? This is self-examination. And do you live a life of integrity? Do you know yourself? Before you go examining others and seeing if they have knowledge, yes, do you know yourself? And do you live a life of integrity? Or is your life pretty scattered, broken up, you don't really understand, it's confusing? Well, that goes to the whole purpose of doing philosophy in this way, as organization. And it's a skill, a habit, but it also means you need to have consistency doing it. Like any skill, you'll get better and better at doing it. So it wouldn't be surprising at all if you initially say, I don't know myself. And when I do start to know myself, it turns out that I'm not consistent. My life doesn't have integrity, and I don't even know what I believe, but I want to improve that. Well, this is the method by which you would do that. Begin to organize your thoughts. Learn, what do you believe is authoritative, which is what settles disputes. What is real? What is eternal? What is it to be a human? And what is good for a human? How should you live? What choices should you make? All of that is why I think philosophy is fascinating, but why it's also not just an abstract topic. It has so much application for how we live our lives. Thanks for joining me.